Dawn breaks over a landscape built by secrets quiet, golden, and lying through its teeth. Somewhere beyond the horizon, in a world ruled entirely by men, a single story sits buried under dust and denial. A story of power, obsession, betrayal, and the one man who should never have been forgotten. Two short breaths, one long truth. He wasn't born powerful, he wasn't born safe. Yet somehow, he became the gravitational pull inside a household of men who pretended to control everything but themselves. And if you listen closely, if you let the silence stretch, you might hear the echo of choices that rewrote more than one life. Choices that shattered loyalty, twisted desire, and ended with a disappearance that no man alive could explain. You think you know what drives a man to obsession, you think you know what breaks him? Keep watching. You're about to step into a world where every bond is a weapon, and every secret has teeth. Before we go any further, take a second, just a quick breath to join this journey. Tap subscribe, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit the like button if these deep dive stories pull you in the way they do me. It helps more than you think, and honestly, it keeps this channel alive so we can keep unearthing the stories other people would rather stay buried. The morning haze lifted slowly over Blue Valley, revealing a settlement built entirely by men who lived hard, fought harder, and trusted almost no one. When a lone traveler appeared on the ridge, every man stopped working. He walked with the calm certainty of someone shaped by storms rather than shelter. His coat was worn, boots scarred, and eyes steady enough to unsettle even men accustomed to danger. He carried no fear, only quiet purpose. The blacksmith, Garin, tightened his grip on the hammer resting against his thigh. Men didn't wander into Blue Valley without reason. The valley wasn't on any map by design, and outsiders never arrived alive by accident. The traveler paused at the entrance, letting the dust settle around his boots. He scanned the settlement with a gaze that measured distance, opportunity, and threat in a single sweep. Not a single man dared blink. Rook, the settlement's watchman, stepped forward with the authority of a man who had seen too many betrayals. He demanded a name. The traveler gave only one, Cael. No history, no origin, nothing else a man could verify. Names alone meant very little in Blue Valley. Stories mattered more, and Cael offered none. Instead, he watched every movement around him with the discipline of someone accustomed to studying patterns long before speaking. When Cael asked for water, the men exchanged wary glances. Outsiders usually arrived starving or frantic. But Cael carried himself like a man who had chosen his hunger deliberately, using it as a test for others. Garin fetched a ladle of cold water, yet kept his eyes fixed on Cael the entire time. The way Cael drank slowly, carefully, assessing the metal container told Garin this man had never stopped expecting danger. The valley chief, Marduk, emerged from his workshop, wiping sawdust from his hands. He examined Cael with the interest of a man who recognized strength suppressed beneath silence. He nodded for Cael to follow him inside. Inside the chief's quarters, Marduk asked what brought Cael to a valley men abandoned the world to build. Cael answered simply, he was searching for a man who didn't want to be found, a man known only as Thorn. The room stiffened. Thorn's name wasn't spoken lightly. Every man in Blue Valley respected him, feared him, or owed him something difficult to repay. Marduk asked why Cael wanted Thorn. Cael refused to explain. Outside, word spread quickly. Men gathered in small clusters, whispering about the traveler with the guarded sobriety of men who lived by unspoken rules. Blue Valley had no room for coincidences or wandering mysteries. Cael stood in the center of the settlement as men circled cautiously. He didn't posture, didn't boast, didn't reach for any hidden weapon. His stillness said he'd lived through darker places than this. When the wind shifted, the scent of pine and forge smoke wrapped around him like a warning. Blue Valley looked peaceful, but every man here had survived something violent enough to push them into exile willingly. Marduk finally announced that Cael would be allowed to stay one night under watch. No weapons, no wandering. Every man nodded in agreement except Cael, who nodded only after calculating the weight of the promise. The watchman guided him toward the bunkhouse. Men lined the walkway, observing Cael with the intensity usually reserved for threats. Cael didn't react. He knew when attention became a blade and when it became a shield. The bunkhouse smelled of sweat, steel, and the stubborn pride of men who carved their futures by hand. Cael chose a cot in the corner, facing the door. Habits learned from surviving lawless territories never left him. Rook leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching Cael arrange nothing more than a thin blanket. Rook asked if Cael feared Thorn. Cael replied that fear wasn't the reason he came, unfinished truth was. Men outside began sharpening tools, pretending to work while clearly watching the stranger. Cael listened to every metallic scrape, learning more about the valley's tension from sound alone than words ever offered. Night fell abruptly. Lanterns ignited along the pathways, casting long shadows shaped like warnings. Cael stepped outside briefly, inhaling the scent of cold soil and wood smoke. He sensed the valley studying his every movement. When Cael asked about Thorn's last known whereabouts, Rook mentioned a cabin deeper in the mountains, abandoned to anyone except the man who once ruled the valley's silent economy. Cael memorized the direction instantly. By the campfire, groups of men talked in low voices. Some speculated Cael was bounty-born. Others claimed he looked like a ghost from older wars. But one thing united them: none trusted him yet. Cael sat alone, reading the men's expressions through firelight. He noted alliances, rivalries, insecurities, every detail useful to a man hunting someone who hid among men skilled at hiding themselves. As the fire crackled, Garin approached cautiously, offering bread. Cael accepted without hesitation. Garin studied Cael's hands, noting scars that told stories unspoken. These weren't the hands of a wanderer. These were the hands of a survivor. Marduk joined them briefly, placing himself between Cael and the rest of the men. He reminded Cael that Thorn wasn't a man to seek lightly. Cael simply replied that some paths were chosen long before men wanted them. When the chief left, Cael stared into the flames, remembering a time he'd faced Thorn years ago. The man had walked away with a secret Cael couldn't bury. That unfinished wound brought him here. The wind rose again, sweeping through the valley with the sharpness of a blade. Lanterns flickered. Several men turned toward the mountains instinctively, sensing movement in the distance none could confirm. Cael stood upright, eyes narrowing. He recognized that kind of silence, the silence that came before someone powerful stepped into view. The valley seemed to hold its breath. Even the fire dimmed uncertainly. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a branch snapped, not loudly, but deliberately. The kind of sound made by a man who wanted another to know he was near. Cael didn't reach for a weapon, he simply listened. Garin whispered that no man ever came down the mountain at night unless carrying intent. Cael already knew. Thorn wasn't hiding. Thorn had heard the stranger walk into his valley and decided to answer. The men of Blue Valley exchanged glances, tension rippling through their bodies like cold fire. Cael tightened his jaw, preparing for whatever waited beyond the shadows. The night thickened with possibility. More footsteps approached from the ridge, slow, heavy, intentional. The fire crackled once and then quieted again, as if waiting for judgment. Cael stepped forward, shoulders squared, ready for the past to find him. Every man gathered in a half-circle behind Cael, instinctively forming a line neither friendly nor hostile. They simply wanted to witness what kind of storm a stranger had brought into their hidden world. The final echo settled into stillness. The valley, the men, the mountain all frozen in suspended anticipation. Cael exhaled once, steady and unafraid, knowing the truth. The man he sought was finally coming. The ridge lit faintly under a fractured moon as Thorn finally appeared, his silhouette carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him. Every man watching felt the air harden, recognizing a legend stepping forward. Thorn descended with the controlled stride of a man accustomed to silence obeying him. His coat hung heavy with dust, his beard coarse, his eyes sharp enough to cut through the firelight gathering without speaking. Cael didn't move. He stood in the torch glow like a man who had trained himself never to blink when truth approached. Thorn stopped several paces away, studying Cael with quiet recognition that unsettled even hardened men. The valley fell into complete hush. No man dared breathe loudly. The space between Thorn and Cael felt older than their years, older than Blue Valley itself, as if something long buried resurfaced in front of them all. Thorn broke the silence first, voice deep and gravel-worn. He asked Cael why he had returned after vanishing without explanation. The question hung thickly, carrying decades of unspoken weight between two men shaped by survival. Cael answered with the same cold honesty that had once made Thorn trust him. He said the past had finally caught up, and only Thorn held the missing piece necessary to finish what started years earlier. Marduk watched closely, sensing history written in coded glances and hardened posture. Men didn't speak of their shared scars unless forced, and these two carried scars only the other could recognize without explanation or denial. Garin shifted uneasily at the fire's edge. The valley had seen many disputes, but never two men standing so still while tension burned hot enough to feel through the boots of everyone present that night. Thorn's expression didn't soften, but something in his eyes shifted, a recognition of debts unpaid. He told Cael that answers demanded a price, and Blue Valley was not a place where men paid lightly. Cael stepped forward once, closing half the distance between them, his voice lowered, steady as stone. He said he was willing to pay whatever Thorn demanded, as long as the truth ended the unfinished war inside him. Rook circled subtly, ready for violence. These weren't ordinary men meeting. These were men forged by conflict, men who once fought beside each other and eventually stood on opposite sides of a battlefield none understood fully. Thorn finally signaled for Cael to walk with him away from the fire. Men parted silently, forming an aisle like a trial corridor. Every step echoed, weighted by years that both men had tried to bury. Beyond the firelight, the valley opened into a darker quiet. Thorn led Cael toward the old quarry, a place where Blue Valley's founding men carved their lives into unforgiving stone. No conversations ever left that ground. The quarry walls rose like jagged guardians as Thorn halted and faced Cael. Moonlight caught the sharp lines of their expressions. Thorn asked if Cael remembered the oath they once swore at the ruins of Blackford. Cael nodded without hesitation. No man forgot an oath sworn in blood. Thorn stepped closer and revealed what Cael feared, that the betrayal Cael believed he had witnessed was far more complicated than memory allowed. Cael clenched his jaw, the pain of old misunderstandings ripping through him like reopened wounds. Thorn explained that the man Cael swore to protect had orchestrated the conflict, turning them against each other deliberately and strategically. The revelation struck Cael harder than any blade. He staggered slightly, breath tight, mind spinning through buried moments. Thorn watched him steadily, offering no comfort. Men in Blue Valley rarely comforted another's reckoning. The wind shifted coldly through the quarry. Cael demanded to know why Thorn never told him the truth. Thorn answered that Cael wasn't ready to hear it then, and perhaps still wasn't ready now. Cael felt anger blaze beneath his ribs, not at Thorn, but at himself for believing half-truths that shaped years of exile. Thorn let the silence sit heavy, allowing Cael to absorb the ugliness of clarity. Back at the fire, men whispered nervously. None dared approach the quarry, but every man knew this meeting would alter the valley's fragile balance. Secrets changed everything, especially when carried by men already haunted. Thorn finally turned away from Cael, giving him space to breathe. He said a man named Varric still lived and still profited from the war he created between them. That alone was reason enough to reunite. Cael straightened, a new steadiness settling through him. Thorn confirmed the location north of the valley, past the Iron Ridge where outcasts traded in shadows. Varric waited there, unaware that old ghosts were returning. Together, Cael and Thorn walked back toward the settlement. Their silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was the silence of two men preparing for something larger than pride, larger than grudges, larger even than survival. The firelight caught Thorn's face first, then Cael's. Men around the flames stiffened, sensing a shift in power. No weapons drawn, no fists raised, just two men walking side by side for the first time in years. Thorn addressed the valley with a short command. He announced that Cael would stay until dawn, and no man was to interfere. Not with his rest, not with his path, not with the war he carried inside. Men exchanged wary glances. Thorn rarely vouched for anyone. When he did, that man was either extremely dangerous or extremely necessary. Cael, the stranger turned return ghost, seemed to be both at once. Inside the bunkhouse, Cael lay awake long after the others slept. He stared at the wooden ceiling, replaying Thorn's revelation 100 times, feeling his understanding of the past crumble and rebuild itself painfully. Outside, Thorn stood guard beneath the fading moon. He watched the mountains, watching for threats that might follow Cael's arrival. Old enemies never slept long, especially when discarded men reunited under uncertain peace. Rook wandered near Thorn, pretending to check lanterns. Thorn warned him that the next days would reshape the valley's boundaries. Men like Varric didn't allow loose ends, and Cael's return wasn't a quiet event. Thorn stayed outside until dawn's first pale light crept across his boots. When morning finally broke over Blue Valley, every man felt tension settle deeper, heavier, like the valley itself braced for unseen impact. Cael stepped outside, meeting Thorn's gaze across the silent yard. No words exchanged, none needed. Two men stood aligned again, ready to face the truth neither wanted but both required. And somewhere beyond the northern ridge, Varric stirred in his hidden camp, unaware that his long-avoided reckoning had already taken its first quiet step into motion. Dawn cracked over Blue Valley with a chill sharp enough to sting exposed skin. Cael tightened his coat, meeting Thorn at the edge of the settlement where every man stood watching, waiting to see them depart. Thorn handed Cael a hardened leather pack, heavier than it looked. Inside were rations, a forged map, and a steel dagger balanced for close combat. No words were exchanged. Men didn't explain tools meant for survival. Rook stepped forward, offering a silent nod before retreating. Thorn didn't acknowledge it, but Cael did. Even small gestures mattered when men understood the road ahead would test everything they believed about loyalty. They left the valley without ceremony. The narrow trail cut upward in steep, unforgiving curves. Loose gravel slid beneath their boots, forcing them to brace against jagged rock. Thorn moved steadily, Cael matching his pace without question. Wine knifed through the ridge, carrying the metallic scent of the iron deposits buried deep beneath the mountains. The terrain grew harsher, stripping away any illusion of safety the valley had offered them hours earlier. Cael felt the weight of unfinished truth pushing him onward. Thorn noticed, but said nothing. Men who carried heavy history rarely needed encouragement, only direction. And Thorn gave direction like a man rebuilding fate itself. By midday, the path narrowed into a ledge barely wide enough for 2 boots. Below them stretched a canyon carved by centuries of storms. Cael stepped carefully, aware one misstep could send him plummeting. Thorn halted suddenly, raising a hand. Cael froze. Ahead, stones shifted quietly, too deliberate for natural movement. Thorn crouched low, signaling Cael to hold position. Someone watched them from the shadows above. A silhouette emerged lean, broad-shouldered, armed with a crossbow. He aimed downward but didn't fire. Thorn spoke his name aloud. Yarrick. The man stiffened, surprised Thorn recognized him after all these years. Yarrick descended slowly, crossbow still raised. Thorn introduced Cael with a tone that carried warning. Yarrick asked if they were hunting Varric. Cael answered honestly, saying they had no time for detours or interference. Yarrick lowered the weapon eventually, though caution flickered in his eyes. He warned them that Varric's men had doubled their numbers in the ridge, training for reasons no one yet understood. Thorn exchanged a grim look with Cael. Yarrick stepped aside, granting them passage. Before they continued, he told Cael that Thorn once saved his life. Cael nodded, realizing Thorn's influence reached farther than any man in the valley ever mentioned. The trail shifted into dense forest, shadows thickening between iron-colored trunks. Cael kept his hand near his dagger. Thorn scanned each clearing with instinct sharpened through years of confronting danger disguised as silence. They crossed abandoned campsites, ashes cold, footprints half erased by wind. Thorn knelt beside one, tracing boot prints with scarred fingers. The direction told him everything. Varric's men traveled heavily armed, moving towards something large. As they pressed deeper, the sky darkened prematurely. Iron Ridge always carried its own weather, bitter and unpredictable. Thorn recognized the signs of an incoming storm. They needed shelter or risk being trapped. They located a ruined watchtower built decades earlier by men long dead. Inside, broken beams sagged under age, but the stone foundation held firm enough to shield them from the approaching storm's fury. While lightning cracked through the sky, Cael set a small fire. Thorn sat across from him, sharpening the dagger Cael carried. Sparks reflected in his eyes as he finally spoke about the man they pursued. Varric wasn't just an enemy, he was a strategist who manipulated men like pieces on a board. Thorn explained how Varric had orchestrated betrayals across 3 territories, creating conflict to profit from chaos. Cael listened, piecing together the final fragments of truth. Thorn revealed Varric's ultimate goal, establishing a mercenary empire hidden in the ridge. Men who resisted were eliminated quietly. Men who complied disappeared just as silently. The storm eased by nightfall, leaving the forest dripping and eerily quiet. Cael and Thorn resumed their march beneath a moon veiled by thin clouds. Their footsteps sounded deliberate, like war drums beating steadily. As they approached the ridge summit, Thorn slowed again. Below them, torchlight flickered from a concealed encampment. Varric's men moved in practiced formation, training with methods meant for coordinated violence. Cael exhaled slowly, realizing Varric wasn't hiding. He was preparing. Thorn motioned for silence. They needed to observe before choosing their next move. Impulse would get them killed faster than blades ever could. From above, they witnessed Varric himself, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a scar across his jaw giving commands to hardened fighters. Cael felt heat rise in his chest. Memories resurfaced like wounds reopening. Thorn crouched beside Cael, whispering that confronting Varric now meant suicide. Cael clenched his fists but forced himself still. Patience wasn't easy, but survival demanded it. Thorn's hand on his shoulder reinforced the warning. They retreated quietly, circling north toward a cave known only to scouts. Inside, Thorn lit a single lantern. The flickering glow revealed maps etched directly into the rock locations, pathways, and hidden routes Varric used. Cael realized Thorn had been preparing for this confrontation long before Cael arrived. Thorn didn't deny it. He said he always knew Varric wasn't finished, only waiting for the right moment to strike back. Silence stretched as Cael studied the carved routes. Thorn finally said they would strike at dawn. Not to kill Varric immediately, but to dismantle his network before confronting the man who broke everything between them. Cael nodded slowly, accepting the strategy. Thorn placed a compass into Cael's hand, an object they once shared when they were brothers in arms. Cael felt its weight differently now, like a promise reforged. Night settled deeply around them. Thorn kept watch near the cave entrance while Cael rested briefly. Wind whispered through the ridge, carrying the faint echo of men preparing for violence they couldn't yet see. Before dawn, Thorn woke Cael with a single touch. They stepped into the cold morning air. The valley below shimmered with rising fog, concealing their movements as they advanced toward Varric's hidden borders. Every step felt heavier, but Cael moved with certainty. Thorn followed closely, knowing the path ahead demanded more than survival skills. It demanded trust rebuilt between two men shaped by the same fire. As sunlight broke over the ridge, the first alarm whistle rose from the encampment below. Varric's men spotted movement. Thorn looked at Cael, eyes steady. Cael returned the look. No turning back now. Together, they sprinted toward the chaos forming beneath the ridge. The day they had both avoided for years had arrived. Varric would finally face the two men he tried to destroy long ago. And this time, neither Cael nor Thorn intended to leave the Iron Ridge without ending what began all those years before. The ridge erupted with shouts as Varric's sentries scrambled, torches flaring across the camp like fire slicing dawn. Cael and Thorn moved like shadows cutting downhill, boots crushing frost-hardened soil in silent momentum. Arrows sliced the air, embedding into trees behind them. Thorn ducked, pulling Cael behind a jagged boulder. Their breathing matched steady, controlled to men shaped by battles harsher than this morning's rising chaos. Cael scanned the camp below, noting guard rotations, weapon placements, and escape routes. Thorn recognized the expression. Cael had always analyzed battlefields faster than any man, turning patterns into survival before others blinked. They pushed forward again, slipping past the outer ring of tents. Varric's soldiers sprinted toward the disturbance, unaware the two ghosts they hunted were already inside the heart of the encampment, prepared to end everything. Thorn signaled left. Cael nodded, circling toward the supply tents where Varric stored stolen munitions. A single spark here would cripple the entire operation. Cael reached for his flint without hesitation. Thorn tackled a guard silently, dragging him behind a tent. A brief struggle, a muffled grunt, then stillness. The camp's noise swallowed everything. Men in turmoil rarely noticed individual silence scattered between shouts. Cael struck the flint, lighting oil-soaked sacks. Flames rose instantly, devouring crates of powder and weapons. A blast rippled outward, shattering camp discipline and sending men running for cover they couldn't properly reach. Thorn rejoined him, face streaked with ash. He pointed toward the command tent where Varric's silhouette moved sharply. Cael followed, feet pounding through smoke as they cut between collapsing structures and fleeing fighters. Inside the command tent, Varric stood calmly, as if expecting them. His scarred jaw tightened when Cael stepped forward. The fire outside illuminated half his face, revealing a man unshaken by the destruction unfolding. Varric addressed Thorn first, voice steady as steel. He accused Thorn of returning with a traitor. Thorn answered coldly, telling Varric he'd manipulated every man who ever trusted him and built an empire of lies. Cael approached slowly, eyes fixed on Varric. Varric smirked, saying Cael had always been too sentimental to survive the world he tried to understand. Cael said sentiment didn't bring him here, truth did. Varric grabbed a blade from the table, spinning it in his fingers. Thorn mirrored the motion, drawing his own dagger. Cael stood between them, aware this confrontation had been brewing far longer than he realized. Varric lunged first. Thorn met the strike, steel clashing violently. Cael circled behind, forcing Varric away from the tent's exit. Every move carried layered memories: training, betrayal, survival learned at the edges of war. A hard blow sent Thorn stumbling. Cael intercepted Varric's second strike, locking wrists. Their eyes met, recognition burning between former brothers. Varric whispered that Cael always chose the wrong side of history. Cael twisted Varric's wrist sharply, disarming him. But Varric retaliated with a knee to Cael's ribs, knocking him back. Thorn recovered in time, tackling Varric and driving him into the tent's central support beam. The beam cracked, canvas sagging. Cael surged forward again, landing a blow to Varric's jaw with enough force to stagger him. Thorn seized the moment, pressing Varric against the splintering pole with unyielding strength. Varric gasped out fractured words, insisting he wasn't alone in his plans. Thorn told him it didn't matter. But Cael heard something in Varric's tone, a final truth buried beneath arrogance and decay. Cael asked who else had been recruited. Varric laughed bitterly, saying men from 3 territories had already joined him, waiting beyond the ridge. Burning the camp changed nothing. The network survived without him. The admission chilled the air. Thorn pressed harder, cracking the beam until the whole tent groaned. Varric finally stopped resisting, breath ragged as he realized his empire was collapsing and his influence crumbling rapidly. Cael stepped closer, words low. He asked if Varric ever regretted starting the war that broke them. Varric didn't hesitate. He said regret was for men too afraid to reshape the world in their image. Thorn slammed him once against the pole, silencing the twisted philosophy. Cael held Thorn's shoulder, signaling the fight was finished. Varric, defeated and pinned, stared upward with eyes drained of defiance. Thorn released him. Varric collapsed, muscles trembling from exhaustion and loss. Cael crouched beside him, saying the war ended today because truth finally had space to breathe. Varric closed his eyes, accepting the finality. They left the tent as flames spread through the camp. Varric's men scattered in fear, abandoning weapons and alliances. None attempted pursuit. They wanted no part of a losing cause or collapsing dream. Thorn and Cael ascended the ridge slowly, muscles heavy, lungs aching from smoke. The sun broke fully over the horizon, casting hard gold across the valley and turning the morning into something almost peaceful. At the summit, they paused, staring down at the burning camp. Thorn remarked that beginnings and endings often looked the same: flames, shadows, and men learning to late what mattered and what never truly did. Cael breathed deeply, feeling weight lift from a place he'd carried grief for years. Thorn rested a hand briefly on Cael's back, acknowledging everything they survived, everything they rebuilt, everything they chose not to repeat. They descended the far side of the ridge, leaving the remnants of Varric's empire behind. Smoke trailed upward like a final farewell. Neither man looked back again. Some wars ended only by refusing to revisit them. The trail widened into an open field where wind pushed tall grass in rhythmic waves. Cael finally spoke, asking what came next. Thorn said the valley needed rebuilding, and men there needed truth restored. Cael nodded, accepting the new direction. They walked side by side, steps synchronized naturally. A bond once shattered now felt stronger, forged not in blind loyalty but in earned understanding shaped through pain. By midday, Blue Valley appeared in the distance, its structures small against the mountains but steady, steadfast, still alive. Thorn pointed toward it, saying they would tell the men everything: no lies, no guarded shadows. Cael felt something close to peace settle in his chest, not completion, but possibility. Perhaps for the first time, his steps carried potential instead of burden, creation instead of old wounds reopening endlessly. As they entered the valley, men gathered quickly, reading answers in their expressions. Thorn spoke plainly, telling them Varric's camp had fallen and the threat for now was broken. Relief rippled through hardened faces. Cael stepped forward, admitting the truth of their fractured past and the danger still looming beyond the mountains. Men listened, understanding a new era required voices unafraid of speaking what others avoided. Marduk approached them, eyes steady. He welcomed Cael formally into the valley for as long as he chose. Cael accepted, recognizing the offer as something deeper than shelter, an invitation to belong again. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in molten orange. Cael and Thorn stood at the edge of the settlement, watching the valley breathe quietly, feeling its pulse match the rhythm of their new beginning. And for the first time in many years, Cael realized he wasn't walking into a storm or running from a past he couldn't repair. He was stepping forward with a man who understood him completely. Together, they faced the horizon to men hardened by history, shaped by betrayal, and now bound by a truth that no enemy could fracture. Their war was finished, their story, finally, could begin anew.